Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to do a critique video today, and I'm going to try again to see if I could possibly do one without any editing, just because it's fun and it's a challenge, and I feel like it helps mentally keep me on track and keep me from rambling too much. So yes, we are going to be talking about two different paintings today. These were both submitted by patrons, and they're both fairly different from the type of work that I usually do, which I find challenging to critique work that's pretty different from mine, but also, yeah, really fun and interesting, and it forces me to think. You know, I have my own criteria for how I think about my work and what I want my work to look like, but when somebody else obviously has different goals than I do, it forces me to think through like what is making that piece successful and what could be improved. So we're going to talk about these two paintings, and I think I just said this, but yes, they're both submitted by patrons. And I'm going to do my usual format, the things that I think are working well in that piece, and then the things that I think could be improved. So yes, I think we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. So this first painting, this is by Veronika. Also, I have notes as usual with these videos. Veronika, oh my goodness. Veronika, we're just gonna say Veronika L, because people are constantly messing up my last name, so I don't want to mess up anybody else's last name, but I will put Veronika's information and her handles and username and all on Instagram and all of that in the description box, so be sure to check that out there. So yes, this beautiful piece is by Veronika, and she painted it in watercolor on cold pressed paper, I believe. So I'm just glancing over at my notes here. Okay, so yes, what I think is working well in the piece, the first and foremost, for me, it's the color. I just love the color in this piece. It's so dreamy and really delicate, but it's still like bright and soft at the same time. So I love that the colors feel really true and clear, but they're not too saturated. And then I love the texture too. You know, if you follow my work, and especially if you watch any videos of me painting, I am just obsessed with texture. I love texture. And Veronika has a lot of that going on here. Using a cold pressed paper really helps. And then she has also just let the watercolor do its thing and be watercolor and move the way that watercolor does. She's given it a lot of movement and life, and that gives it a good sense of texture as well. And then I think the composition works really well. It's just an overall strong composition. She sent me her reference photo as well, which I will pop up on the screen here so that you can see it. And one big compositional difference between the reference photo and the finished painting is that she did not include this kind of foreground hill that cuts off a bit of the view, and I personally think that was a smart move. I think, yeah, it just adds to the overall strength of the composition. So moving on to what could be improved, and I always give this caveat, but I will say it again here that of course some of these are going to be related to taste, related to just how I particularly see the work and what my artistic goals would be. So take all of this with a grain of salt, and if something works for you and it lands well, then run with it, and if it doesn't and it makes you feel I don't know, like if you get stuck on it, then don't worry about it. Just, yeah, take the stuff with a grain of salt, use what works, and then leave the rest. So, okay, so could improve. Personally, I would opt for a bit more precision in the drawing stage. Now, I can tell by Veronika's style that she has a looser style than I do, and that is beautiful. But my personal opinion is that even with looseness, and actually even especially with looseness, if you're going to have that more painterly style where you let things be kind of flowy and natural, that it is even more important with some of those grounding, anchoring details to get them fairly precise. So when you're using minimal brush strokes and you don't have a ton of when you don't have a ton of brush strokes and things are really minimalistic, any little tweak in an angle really stands out. So one that pops out for me is this barn door here. I think just giving that door a straight edge so that it's plumb and it looks like yeah, it looks like it's an actual building. You don't have to necessarily include any more details. I'm not saying that, but having that, the straightness of those lines will make the building feel a lot more weighty and a lot more realistic. And in my view, it will make the looseness and the free flowingness of the rest of the painting stand out even more. So it's definitely a balancing act there, but that would be one, the straightening up those angles on the barn, and just giving that building a bit more of a solid feel. Of course, when I don't want to edit the video, I have like a massively itchy nose, but what can you do? All right, so for the next thing that could be improved would be to add maybe a little bit more detail. And of course, I'm like the detail person, so that's what I would say. But yes, just a few tiny little select bits more of detail, select bits. Oh my gosh, you guys. This is going to be amazing if I decide not to edit this, but there we go. So having a few things that you could do for the detail would be like maybe to include the road. I'm guessing that there was a reason that you omitted that since it's in the reference photo and it's not here. Maybe that was something that the client wanted, but I think that it is nice just in terms of a detail to look at. And it also, to me, it makes the scale feel more, the subject, not the scale. It makes the subject feel more approachable because I can imagine myself like on that road actually getting to that building. It makes it feel like a more human landscape, I guess. So yeah, adding that little road in there. And you could also just put a few more detailed elements in the foreground, since the background, you do have that like nice blurred watercolor effect that is a little bit, for me anyway, a little bit evocative of when you blur out the field of vision in a photo. Depth of field, that's the word I'm looking for. It gives it that sense of depth of field. A way that you could increase that if you wanted to would be to include some little tiny detail elements in the foreground. Something really simple, just like blades of grass or maybe like a mustard flower or something that would be growing in that area. And then the last thing would be values. So darks and lights. And this, I think, particularly would come into play around the barn. And you are already doing some of this. And overall, there is a pretty broad value range. You do have some very darks in the piece, as well as some very light lights, rather. I'm just looking again at my notes and the painting to get clear on what I want to say. Yes. So, and actually I'm just noticing now something else that I really like about this painting, and that is that you have made, the trees that are in the way background, those are kind of a cooler green as opposed to the green that's in the foreground. It's a warmer green. And so it makes it feel like it's popping out a bit more and feels closer to the viewer. Yes, I would just add a little bit more darkness around the barn. So it looks like to me the only area that you have really used black is on the inside of the door. And I'm definitely a fan of minimizing the use of pure black pigment. And opting for mixing colors whenever you can. But I would add a little bit more darkness, like the greenery that's back behind the barn, to make it feel like it's really sitting back there. And then even some little tiny shadows at the edge of the barn, the edge of the buildings rather, it's themselves. Because right now it looks to me like you're trying to have them be kind of like sitting down below the curve of a hill, and it's just not quite totally clear whether they're being cut off by that hill or whether they're kind of sitting down in the ground. I think either way, having a bit more clarity and some small drop shadows, maybe even just a line. This wouldn't have to be black. This could just be like a really subtle gray. I think that'll make them feel more grounded. Yeah, and I think honestly that's all I have to say about this one. So overall, it's a really beautiful piece, Veronika, and I love your style and your use of color. And yeah, so keep on doing what you're doing. And if you want to take some of those suggestions on board, then I hope they're helpful. All right, so we're moving on to the next piece. And this one, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit nervous about doing this one because I've never critiqued any piece like this at all. I have done some landscapes and I've done some things that were slightly different from my style, but this is pretty different. So it was stretching me out of my comfort zone to feel like, okay, well, how do I critique this in a way that is actually helpful and it's going to be meaningful to this person? So I'll pop it up on the screen here. But yes, this painting is by Patty Burke, another patron. And Patty didn't mention this to me, but I am guessing that this piece was, that there's some kind of goal with this piece to have it be maybe more for like art licensing. It definitely looks like that to me. It looks like something that could be in like a Christmas collection for art licensing. And I have licensed work. I do usually a few licensing deals a year, but I don't have like a licensing agent or anything, and I don't have my work on any licensing databases. It's not something that I pursue. I usually only do that when people come to me. So this piece looks to me like it's pursuing that, like it wants to, like Patty wants it to be used in licensing. So I went ahead and looked up some other work that was made to be licensed. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry you guys, the lighting is changing all over the place. What did I do? Yes, I went and researched other licensing artists and works that they had made for Christmas collections. And I found a couple here, which I will pop up on the screen. And I will put the credits to these down in the description as well. I'm just mentioning these for reference, but yes, we're gonna pop back over to Patty's image here and talk about what is working well. So overall, the first thing that pops out at me is the dog, and that's good because I think it's Patty's focal point, and I think the doggy has a super cute expression, really well drawn, and it's clear from this image, from this illustration, that Patty definitely has some really solid drawing skills. And then also there are tons of little details, and if you look at the details in the piece, some of them are really cute and witty. I like the Bichon fries, I think because this is a Bichon Frise, is that how you say it? I don't actually know that much about little dogs, but yeah, lots of cute and witty details, and then tons of complexity. So those are the three things that I think are working really well in this piece. Moving on to what I think could improve. The first thing I noticed is perspective, and I think Patty, it seems to me, I'm guessing here, again I haven't talked with Patty about this, but it seems to me that Patty really likes the details and she likes the complexity, but sometimes when you focus on that too much first, if other stuff gets missed, like perspective stuff, then it can make those little details just not really, it's almost like it sells them short, because you obviously put so much work into the little details. But if there's just a little bit more work put into the perspective, it will make it feel a lot more realistic. And of course you might say, well, this is obviously a cartoon, there's a dog standing on 2 feet writing on a scroll of paper, it doesn't need to be realistic. And that's true. But there's other elements, other visual elements that cue us into the fact that it is meant to be vaguely realistic, at least in the way that a cartoon is realistic. So it's figurative, there are shadows, the dog, even though it's on 2 legs, the dog looks more or less like a dog. So it should have a fairly realistic environment. So specifically, this area up on the platform here, it's kind of going like up and back. And to me, oh my gosh, I'm getting so distracted by this lighting, you guys. Let me see, can I change that right now with this? Does that work? Kind of. I don't know if it's helping or not. Yeah, we're just gonna roll with this. My goodness. Okay. Yes, the perspective. Up on the platform, it's kind of going up and back. And if you look at these 2 lower shelves, the direction of these lower shelves, let me actually pull this piece up in front of me here rather than just looking at my notes. Come on. Okay, yes. So the bottom shelf is at one angle, and it's kind of going a little bit up and back, and then the shelf above that is going almost straight and back. So then the upper shelf, if this is indeed something that we're looking up at, should tilt back even further than the second shelf did. And that's if the bottom shelves were correct in their perspective. Oh, golly. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Not what I meant to do. Holy moly. Yes. And actually, I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think that those bottom shelves need to be tweaked a little bit too, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, spending a bit more time making sure that the perspective of the environment makes logical sense. That will go a long way in making sure all these little details and interesting parts that you put in the drawing can really feel like they belong there, and like they, yeah, like they're real, as, you know, in the same way that a cartoon environment is real. All right, the next point would be, I guess, like composition and concept. So I think that the concept is really fun. You know, the little the Bichon fries, freeze, whatever. The little doggy who is scratching out on the chalkboard. There's no bad dogs, basically. I think it's a cute concept, but there is so much going on in the drawing itself. There are so many different elements that it makes it tough to see the wittiness of the concept, if that makes sense. So just pulling up here these other two examples that I mentioned, they are both fairly simple, fairly straightforward. They have like more or less one focal point, and it's pretty clear where your eye is supposed to go. And in this one, I think that the focal point is the dog, but I mean, the focal point's definitely the dog, but there's also a ton of very visually stimulating stuff in the foreground. So as much as those little details are amazing, I would probably eliminate quite a few of them and maybe go more towards a composition if you still wanted to have, excuse me, if you still wanted to have the long and narrow composition. I'd have to think through that, but probably I would opt more for a square composition, maybe even not having the railing, or having the railing in a different setting, or using the candy canes to decorate around the chalkboard, and maybe having one or two of the, well, maybe like 2 or 4 of the cutest little elements that you have down below. Those could be like leaning up against the wall or something, but having them on the shelves below the platform, it's just, and more in the foreground, it just draws all of my attention, and it makes it hard to focus on the concept. So I would rework the composition and kind of try to pare things down to make your concept have more of a leading role. Okay, and then the color palette. This would be another thing that I would spend a little time tweaking. I think, again, looking at these examples, this was something I saw pretty consistently in a lot of licensed artwork, and I mostly just looked at licensed Christmas artwork. There is a very consistent, very limited color palette. And here, the 2 primary colors I get are the pale yellow and the pale purple. And those are throughout the whole piece, and in the background, and then in the floor. But other than that, I feel like there are a lot of different colors competing, and I probably would be more apt to choose, just looking at this example here, with the snowman and the penguin hugging. So the main colors here, it has the kind of darker blue background, the blue-green trees, and then a purple scarf and a red scarf. And those are all pretty obvious, pretty upfront colors. And the background even is like a more of a vivid color. And I think having some other color in the background behind the Bichon could be really helpful, because the dog, the Bichon, is really, really pale, really light. And just again, looking at this example, the snowman is a good comparison there, because the snowman is also white. But the snowman has, yes, the foreground, or the ground is white because it's snow, but the background, the trees and the sky, are actually pretty dark. There's several shades darker than the Bichon, or than the snowman. And in Patty's piece, there is the dark chalkboard, but the Bichon isn't really standing in front of that, so we don't get any of that nice contrast. I probably would have the room itself be a bit of a darker color, and try to pick a color palette you know, that's maybe like 3 main colors and 2 accent colors, and just use those over and over and over again as a way to kind of unify and make it cohesive and bring focus to the elements that you really want to stand out. And then I'll just mention one last thing, and that is some details, I think, in the editing process. So if I zoom in really close here, it looks like what Patty has done is draw a lot of these different elements and then kind of collage them together, bring them in and collage them together. And that is totally fine. But I would spend some time making sure that the little tiny white outlines that are around these elements, that those are either erased, or if you're gonna maybe like draw, if you're doing this on your iPad, for example, if you do it on Procreate, you could just draw right on top of those different elements to make them feel like they're more in the same environment and less like they've been cut and pasted. And then on that note, the shadows that are behind these elements, they're drop shadows, but they're very, they're flat, they're flat drop shadows. And what these elements should have is a cast shadow. And a drop shadow is like what's underneath a piece of paper, or what's something else? What's a good example? Yeah, I mean, a piece of paper is probably the best example. And it's something that looks like an effect. It looks like something that has been done digitally as opposed to an actual shadow. A cast shadow would be like down and flat behind the subject. I hope that makes sense. Maybe I will try to include some references, some examples for what that is. But yeah, having actual cast shadows that you could draw in, again, in Procreate or whatever program you're using, that would help it feel a lot more real as well. And I think the combination of like tweaking whatever needs to be tweaked with the perspective so that the perspective makes sense, and then having actual cast shadows as opposed to drop shadows, that will, yeah, that'll make it feel like a really cohesive, believable environment. So, yes, I think that is it. Yeah, so thank you so much to Veronika and Patty for giving me the privilege of talking about your beautiful paintings, and for trusting me with that, and for being brave. And I will say this, I'm always saying something like this, but especially in the critique videos, please be just nothing but kind and supportive to Patty and Veronika in the comments. If I see any mean-spirited or anything nasty, I will just delete it right away, and that person will also be blocked. It takes a lot of guts to put yourself out there, and even more guts to put yourself out there publicly. So Veronika and Patty, big pats on the back to both of you. And thank you to all of you guys for watching, and to Meg for editing, and to my patrons, especially of course to Veronika and Patty, but to all my patrons who support this channel and make it possible for me to make videos and have a video editor, even though I'm working full-time freelance. So that is it, I think. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, you guys, you know the deal. Like the video, please. Comment if you have any comments, any ideas for future videos, and yeah, subscribe and all that good stuff. Yes, have a great week, everybody. I will see you in the next video. Bye.